So our guests have been let in. We will be starting our live stream, and then we will start our recording and with an introduction of TAP, and then I will begin. So
welcome in, everybody.
Yep, thank you for your patience as we get our ducks lined up.
It's great to have everyone here. Hello, Art. I see your message in chat. Also, everyone, feel free to utilize the chat tonight for any questions you may have.
All right, chat is open. We will make some remarks in a moment about housekeeping.
All righty. And I believe we will go ahead and start here.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Hello, my name is Chuck Fall. My co-host.
I'm Mike Zarzano, board member at TAP.
Thank you, Mike. So I am also a board member at TAP. I am a member of the Green Party, and Mike, I'll just say, is going to represent Republican Party. So we have a bipartisan kind of a dialogue tonight. It's what we want to achieve. Before we get into our program, I want to make a disclaimer that our theme tonight is electoral integrity, and that positions and viewpoints expressed in the forum tonight are not necessarily positions held by TAP as an organization. And therefore, the information as provided is from the individual's direct experience, and they are the authorities for what they are conveying. Housekeeping rules: our guests will be muted. The unmuting will occur at the Q&A when we will have an opportunity to ask questions and offer perspectives on the theme of electoral integrity. We appreciate it that people will like and share the TAP forum on social media. Please do that. That's how we get our rankings up and draw attention to our work. So as I said, our topic this evening is electoral integrity. This is a hot button issue, got a lot of attention by Donald Trump in his claim of that the election in 2020 was an electoral, a stolen election. He was called a liar for conveying that by his opponents. Foundational to our evening tonight, and this is at the website, you can watch this later if you haven't seen it yet, is the film Hacking Democracy. It was produced in 2009, and it represents from the work of a frontline activist the serious claim of integrity, or the lack thereof, associated with the electronic voting machines, among other concerns. And so that's kind of the shadow on our conversation tonight. I've brought in a guest, Bill Zwicker from the Green Liberty Caucus. He has experience as a volunteer observing ballot counting in Oregon. He will share his experience and his concerns about achieving electoral integrity. Mike Zarzano, please make an introduction to our other guest tonight. Would you do that right now, Mike?
Sure. Tonight, I have brought in Mr. Chris Jursky. He is the Vice President of Election Integrity at the Florida Republican Assembly. And tonight he will be giving reasons why he is suspicious with several anomalies and suspicious activities. So we look forward to hearing from Chris Jersky. And he has an extensive background in technology, so he is quite suited to discuss this issue. And I look forward to hearing him tonight. Back to you, Chuck.
Thank you, Mike. And I'll just add, on our roster of speakers tonight will also be David Schoenbrunn. Dave is a friend of Truth Action Project. He's a member of the Truth Group. I'm also, it's a discussion list. David has spent a lot of time questioning our electoral process, and he will speak from his heart about his concerns for electoral integrity. And he also has some close knowledge, if you will, of the 2004 election that had John Kerry losing to George Bush. So Mike, and I want to also add that Mike Zarzano, you also have experience in the work of advancing electoral integrity. So I'm going to pass the baton to Mike Zarzano. You can make additional introductions for Chris Jersky. We'll go to Chris. We'll present. Then we will go to Bill Zwicker, Dave Schoenbrunn, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So I'm going to pass the baton to you, Mike Z. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good, Chuck. Thank you. And I would like to also state for the record that I am the Vice President of Outreach and Coalition at Truth at the Florida Republican Assembly. And also, we have put together an assembly of people that have requested a grand jury in the state of Florida to examine election integrity, anomalies, suspicions, etc. And we did that back in April the 4th of 22. And within 90 days, the governor recognized our request and convened the first grand jury of 4 that we requested. And then within 6 months, he convened the second grand jury of 4 that we requested. So this has been a very exciting time in the state of Florida regarding we the people, basically investigating the suspicions of several ongoing crimes. But tonight, I think Mr. Chris Jersky, if he would come on now, I would like to introduce him. And Chris, why don't you just give everyone a good description of yourself and what you've been doing for the past couple years, and let everybody get to know you. I think that'd be a good way to start. Chris?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I typically like to start out by telling a little bit about what wires me. I'm a first-generation American born to 2 Polish immigrants, legal immigrants. And I grew up basically with my whole family escaping communism in Poland at the time. I thought it was, I didn't think it was basically good luck, but at the time, looking back on it, it was. My father arranged a trip for us to visit communist Poland in 1987. And it shook me to my core because it was essentially basically being followed around as I was a teenager, a cocky New Jersey teenager going to a communist country and essentially going there and watching how we were stopped in multiple places. There was checkpoints. You couldn't walk, you couldn't travel freely in the country. We were constantly being watched. Our family basically lived in abject poverty. They had no running water. They had to pull water out of a well in most cases. Only people that had water were people that had apartments in the city, and that wasn't 100% working order. So when I came back, I literally kissed the ground, and it put a lot of the stories from my family as I was growing up in perspective. One of the things I started immediately asking at my high school history classes was, why didn't Poland get their freedom back? Why was everybody else given freedom after World War II, but Poland was given to communist Russia? So you can imagine my whole worldview was changed seeing that. And the biggest thing was I was highly motivated to understand everything about communism and why something so evil could even exist on the planet. I studied anything I could get my hands on from that point forward all the way up to the current time, trying to understand what happened with communism and everything else. But as fate would have it, as the wall was coming down in Poland, I wound up meeting a Venezuelan woman in Fort Lauderdale when I first moved here, wound up marrying her. And as we were gaining our freedom in Poland and our family was becoming liberated, her family was basically being put into totalitarianism under an election regime. So you can imagine how I felt on November 4th, watching deja vu happen all over again with exactly the same playbook being played out, where the media came out and said it was the best election ever. You shouldn't think about anything. We had the most secure election because we used these new machines, yada, yada, yada. But most importantly, I'll never forget how the media twisted everything in Venezuela to make it appear as everything was on the up and up. And they immediately pushed as a psychological operation to worry about the next election, because essentially they were trying to get everybody like a carnival game or a carnival operator to essentially play the next game of a rigged election. And the same thing happened. I mean, over a 10-year period, they basically they opened up the border, they opened up the prisons, and then they had an election, which everybody banked on. They thought that that was going to be the way that they were going to fix everything. And then the guy conceded within 10 seconds, went on news and said, democracy has spoken. We must respect the electoral majority. And essentially he went along like a fixed boxer to basically go along with an obviously stolen election. Because I say obviously because those machines that were in Venezuela were actually created in Florida. They were created in Boca Raton, a company called Smartmatic. So I was studying this stuff when it happened in Venezuela, trying to understand what on earth would let like a person like Jimmy Carter come down to Venezuela and give a stamp of approval on a dictatorship takeover, or a dictatorship taking over, communist dictatorship taking over, and essentially socialize the entire country with United States' blessing. And again, I had deja vu all over again from watching Poland being thrown to the communists for no reason for World War II. So I just want to give that little primer because that's essentially what drives me. I jump out of bed every morning to try and figure out how to stop this because I know what's coming for us. I literally have to send money to my parent or my mother-in-law in Venezuela now. The country, they're just starving everybody. And you're talking about a country that was a little bit above California. Her family used to come here to shop because their money in Venezuela was so valuable that they could literally shop in the United States. And now you can go to Venezuela and there's boxes and dump trucks really full of money laying on the streets. No one wants to pick it up because I think the last time I checked, it was about 1.2 million boliviars is equal 40 cents. So they have to weigh money now instead of count it because no one wants to count it. And that's what's coming for us because you can see the telltale playbook that they did the same thing there. They basically, again, opened the prisons, opened the borders, put everybody on welfare and crashed the economy, printed money to the point of hyperinflation. And it sounds evil because it is. And I just want to make sure everybody keeps that in the back of their mind to understand that something this evil can happen, and especially here in the United States. So with that said, my background is really basically helping investors scale companies. I have a wide range of working in technology to do that, but primarily what I like to do is shape companies and build, roughly speaking, bureaucracies with process and procedures. So I usually get thrown into companies that I have no idea anybody there. The investor basically puts me in after they acquire the company, and I have to essentially get on the ground, figure out and reverse engineer the entire company, figure out what the problems are. And every company that we have ever dealt with has some either fraud or waste that has to be cleaned up. So it's one of my tasks to basically find and eliminate that fraud, because that's usually one of the things that causes these companies to scale. So after we get done cleaning the companies up, it's not unusual for us to triple or quadruple the company within about 2 years. So that said, one of the things that we recently literally just recently happened was last Thursday, a committee hearing was called in Tallahassee to go over the certification process of our voting machines. They kept it close to the vest. They didn't advertise it. We found out through some back channels that that hearing was going to happen, and somebody called me specifically to invite me to basically speak on the subject. I am not specifically an expert for the machines, only because I lack the certifications, but I've worked so far in IT that I understand all the issues, but I know who is certified. And essentially we called Clay Parikh, which I don't know if that name sounds familiar to you. Clay Parikh is essentially a whistleblower that worked 9 years in the election systems labs, testing at least 7 different vendors of election systems. His takeaway, and one of the things he was raising alarms about, was how horribly inadequate the testing standards were. And I listened to him. He was a personal hero of mine. Luckily, I became good friends of him while filming this movie that's going to be coming out here called Let My People Go. And luckily, he offered to come down to Florida to speak as an expert. That was denied, so we chose to at least do an interview and review what we found in that presentation. I will tell you it's shocking. We're going to try and evaluate it because the interview itself was close to about 2 hours, but the takeaway points are 3 main topics. The first one being is that our certification process from the state was written in 2005. To give you a perspective, 2005 was the first and probably most likely only standard that was created shortly after the hanging Chad situation, because it typically takes between 3 to 4 years for them to build a certification document or a certification standard, because there's lots of things that go into it from a bureaucratic standpoint. So you can imagine we had the hanging Chad situation in 2000, and then that certification document came out in 2005. If you can think back to those days, we had Motorola flip phones, the Razor. There was hardly any basically mobile internet back then. Wireless was a joke. In 2005, the biggest USB stick you could get was about 256 megabytes, not gigabytes, megabytes. So you really didn't have to do much from a security standpoint other than secure the machines. As long as you didn't give people physical access to the machines were pretty secure, because the only way you could really hack a machine back in 2005 is you had to be standing in front of it with a wired connection to be able to do anything to it. Other than that, there was no wireless technology to take advantage of computers. Fast forward to today, if just to put it in a frame of reference, the iPhone came out in 2007. Fast forward to today, we now have modern wireless modems that can essentially, I can do this with my cell phone, where I could walk up and change the entire OS in a couple minutes just using a cell phone, because I can move that much data across a wireless connection and manipulate anything I want to that computer. The second thing that was most shocking was essentially, on top of the fact that the certification process was so old, there was zero capable people with any credentials at the State Department or Division of Elections that had any cybersecurity certificates. And they readily admitted that during the hearing. They were asked flat out who at the State Department and Division of Elections has any cybersecurity background. And they said, no, we have none. They said that they lean heavily on the vendor as well as some federal agencies, but essentially they essentially 100% trust the vendor to have everything done on the up and up. Now, with my background, what I just mentioned as far as scaling companies, it was routine for any company that was more than $2 million, where I came in and I would check the CFO's work, the financials and things like that. And I would build systems to check the accounting systems to make sure the CFO and his accounting department was doing their job. And I would also get a random audit. So any given company that I ever worked in the private sector, it was quite normal to have 3 different layers of audits to check to make sure everybody was doing what they were supposed to be doing. I was auditing the financials. Somebody was coming in after me to audit me and the financials to make sure everything was on the up and up. We have zero oversight at the Florida State Department, and basically they're trusting 100% of the everything to the vendor and saying that the vendor is basically in charge of this. So if you put this all together with the very old standards of certification, And then you have a very, very lax, very, very lax system of certification at the State Department. The last and most damning thing that basically probably will shock you is that even if we had the most perfect and rigorous testing at the State Department, the most damning thing that came out of that meeting was there is zero oversight when the vendor releases those machines down to the county level. The county essentially has employees that plug the machine into the wall, push it into place, and that's it. They're not allowed to open machines. They're not allowed to operate the machines. The vendor is in charge of all of that. So if you understand what that means, you could literally have anything installed and anything set up at a county level, precinct level, and it would not be the same thing that was tested even at the State Department. So there's no instructions like we know how to do that in the cybersecurity world, because there is ways of what's called doing a trusted image, and there's ways of checking to make sure that that machine is the exact same machine that was fully developed and tested. That's quite normal in the private sector to be able to do. But when we press the officials, if anything like that is done, nothing like that is done, nothing. So essentially they're 100% trusting the vendor to deliver and set up all of the equipment in these various counties with zero oversight. We have a very lax certification process at the state level. And again, no one at the State Department knows anything about IT or cybersecurity. We were actually kind of shocked because they didn't even know what the difference between what's called source code. Source code is a very technical term in IT, but they were assuming that the software that's installed on the machines is all that needs to be checked. When anybody in IT understands that the machine, the tabulator, is a complete system. So to give you an example of how something can be taken advantage of that's not a hack, okay, and not a bug, is that our scanners have a small little UV sensor that's supposed to scan the paper looking for an invisible watermark that basically tells us that this is the correct ballot paper to make sure that we don't have counterfeit ballots being scanned in. Well, that's been demonstrated over and over again by various people in various counties that was deactivated. So that's not necessarily a bug. That's not necessarily a hack. That's just essentially somebody coming in and disabling something that was there to prevent counterfeit ballots from being scanned. So this is what we're trying to explain to them. But again, they lack any understanding in cyber or technology to even think that that's an issue, where for a basic person with common sense would believe that, like, hey, how are you protecting our systems and ballots if you can't guarantee that whatever you've tested at the state level is the same thing we're using when we walk into our various precincts on election day? So hopefully that covers the basics. I'm coming up on my time. I guess we'll leave everything else for questions for later.
Well, thank you, Chris. And I did want to ask you one thing about the various vendors in the state of Florida. I believe there are 3 total. What is it? Smartmatic, ES&S, and Dominion.
Right now, I believe ECSS is the major one. Dominion has some others. Smartmatic has kind of gone away because what they've done with Smartmatic, if they again, this goes to Patrick Byrne, and I have to readily admit that I'm not like completely read up on every detail of the machines. But from what I've been told, the Smartmatic system that was in Venezuela was sucked up into the various vendors because there was a big lawsuit that happened that they had to all trade code so they wouldn't be considered a monopoly. So that essentially allowed Smartmatic to infect or become what like if, for example, if you open up your computer and you have Windows, the Windows operating system, we've been told that Smartmatic now is the operating system for all the voting machines because they all have to communicate with one another. Even though you might have Dominion in one county and ECS in another, ultimately all the tabulation has to be able to work and talk to one another. So it would appear that they're sharing a lot of the technology.
Okay, and I think it needs to be noted as well that recently, about a month and a half ago, in the Southern Federal Court District, Smartmatic was implicated in a federal criminal investigation. Actually, an indictment was handed down to the Philippine election
Yeah.
official. And there are 4 unindicted co-conspirators being alleged. So this is going to be very interesting to see where this goes. Could you comment on that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, literally, Philippines were so infuriated when they found out that their elections were hacked because they proved it and found out in court. There was death threats for all the employees. They literally ran out of the country when they found out that they had their election stolen like that. And there's other fingerprints pointing back to the United States, essentially helping fund it and basically implement it. So they have a long track record outside of Venezuela. It boggles my mind that a company that was created in a little, like it was literally in a little shop. I drove by it back in 2002, 2003. It was a little tiny building, like one of those like places where they have air conditioning shops and things like that in Boca Raton on the side of the road, those commercial parks. And somehow now they have offices globally. And I don't understand how they could that election machines could be that that profitable. It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. Well, thanks again, Chris, and we look forward to the Q&A coming up. And now back to Chuck. Chuck, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. And I listening to you, I am reminded of the movie Hacking Democracy, which focuses on the electronic voting machines. I'm going to turn now to Bill Zwicker, my friend from Oregon and activist in the Green Liberty Caucus. Bill, I'm going to give you the mic, and you're going to share start with your concerns about electoral integrity, where these concerns have led you as a public citizen, if you will, an activist. And the shadow on all of this is, well, what is going to be a secure and authentic voting system? Because what we're responding to are the doubts that people have, and doubt is a corrosive. If we can't have confidence, we have problems in our democracy, in our republic, and so on. So, Bill, go for it. Where are you at on this topic? Please share.
Well, thank you, Chuck. I'd like to comment about some of the things Chris said, and I agree 100% that the kind of things that he was describing in Poland is that very definitely heading our way, and we need to start paying more attention. We've been letting our democracy run on autopilot for far too long. Voting is something that's one of your civic duties that you need to do, and we really don't pay enough attention to that process. So my experience really has been a long timeline of erosion of confidence in the voting system. So my first voting experiences way back in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, was to go to a polling place. You know, you got checked in. There was a bunch of mechanical machines with curtains. You go in there and you make your selection and open the curtain and you're done. Now, the question of, can you trust that system? Well, we really were taking that system on faith. We assume that because it's mechanical, that it was very easy to audit those machines and verify the correctness of that. So there was not a lot of controversy back then. We took it on faith that those votes were counted as they were cast. Then, you know, along my timeline, I started becoming concerned about the two-party system. I was born into a Republican household, and you know, in the 1960 election, when Kennedy won, there was some controversy about, oh, well, maybe the Chicago machine threw the election for Kennedy. But it wasn't a big controversy back then. We all accepted Kennedy was the new president. and we moved on. Then I started becoming interested in third parties. And the reason for that was I was becoming more and more aware as the elections were going on that I had certain conservative values that wouldn't be reflected by the Democratic Party, and I had certain progressive values that wouldn't be respected by the Republican Party. So it seemed to me that we needed parties that represented more points of views than just two. And it also seemed to be that between the two parties, it was almost like they were playing some sort of tag team thing. You have 8 years of a Republican, followed by 8 years of a Democrat, and so on, back and forth. And the voters were not satisfied with either party. It kept eroding our faith in where this country was going. So fast forward to the 2000 election, and that was covered pretty well in the documentary that Chuck just referred to. We had some controversies showing up that weren't explainable. For example, there was apparently, and this was in the movie, some candidates were getting negative votes. Well, how does that happen in the machine that's supposed to be counting things up? And I remember at the time when the recount was going on in Florida, Nina Totenberg got on public television, and she was talking about the possibility of whether or not the U.S. Supreme Court would intervene and stop the recount in Florida. And she said no, because that was a state's issue, and the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, does not interfere with state things that are under state control. Well, she was wrong. The Supreme Court did. It was a conservative Supreme Court, and there was some controversy about who was playing golf with who. So now you can see my confidence in election is starting to erode pretty seriously. So that leads me to 2004. I moved to Oregon. Kerry's running for the Democratic Party, and George Bush is seeking his second term. And my wife and I decided, well, you know, they have mail-in ballots here, and they were hiring people to be able to scan the ballots, verify the ballots as they were coming in. And I thought, well, this is a good chance to see what's going on in the elections. And we wanted to, wanted to learn what we could see, and if we could determine from that experience whether the machines that were counting were, verifiable from the perspective of a participant in the system. Well, one thing, I have to say the experience itself was a pretty positive one. They set up tables of 4 people. They made sure that each table has at least 2-party representation, so that there was no opportunity for people, inspecting the ballots to be biased one way or the other. And being a member of the Green Party at that time, I had a free ticket. I could get to any table I wanted. If there were if there were 3 Republicans and 3 Ds, I could be the other party. And people were very congenial. We took the job very seriously. It was very friendly. People with different political points of view had a lot of respect for each other. The whole process was run by a Democrat and a Republican. So both of them were organizing at that level and were obviously cooperating with each other. So that was encouraging. But we weren't actually involved in counting the votes in any way. What we were doing is inspecting the ballots for errors, usually voter errors. Were the circles filled in correctly? Did they choose more than one candidate, and things like that? And any ballots that were needed fixing, we put in a separate pile and passed all the others on. The big prize for us is to see the ballots being counted. Well, you couldn't really get that close to it. They had the machine that was scanning the ballots and counting them in a separate room. There was a glass window. You could sit outside and watch. The only thing you saw was the operator putting a pile of ballots into the hopper and it's scanning through and then unloading them. We had no idea if they were even the ballots that we just approved. We had to take all of that on faith. So I was convinced as a result of that experience that, well, no, we can't verify. We can't believe the system even getting that close to it. There's still the question of the software and the hardware and who has access to that and what is the auditing process. Can we audit the source code? Can you audit the hardware? Can you check whether or not the machine is being hacked from outside? And the answer, there was no answer to those questions. We would, my wife and I would think that because the machine was counting local ballots, that it would be offline, that there wouldn't be an internet connection. Well, that wasn't true. And it turns out it has to be online to communicate to the central tabulator. So rather than having our confidence enhanced, it was, kind of a sideways thing. Then fast forward to the current situation. We had COVID come along. We've had a lot of evidence that there was some pretty heavy at the corporate level, corporate state level, a cooperation between large corporations and the government to pass through illegal policies that would threaten our liberties and threaten our ability to make our own decisions. And this is parallel to the cooperation between the state and these corporations that run these machines. So my point of view is, if we want to have voting machines count our votes, I don't think it should be in the hands of a private corporation. I don't think it should be a for-profit venture. It should be open source. We should have auditors from the citizenry, not even from the government, from a committee of people from the voters themselves that can go in with some experts, audit the source code, figure out exactly what it does, and where was it going with that? Just not have all this secrecy and not have either party involved. Now, here in Oregon, of course, the party the dominant party is the Democratic Party, and of course, we have this mail-in ballot situation. We don't have a way of really knowing whether the ballots themselves are the ones that are counted, and this is in the hands of a contract that the Democratic controlled state makes with the private corporations. So now my confidence level has eroded to practically zero. I have no confidence in the results of the 2020 election. I have no confidence in the prospects for the 2024 election. So I guess that's where I'm at this point. And the other thing is, I think we need to look at our two-party system, and we need to look at the way we cast votes and count them.
Bill Zwicker, thank you very much. And you've introduced the big shadow on this, and that is, how confident can we be, really? And so I am looking forward to the Q&A, and let's flip right over now to Dave Schoenbrunn, a friend of TAP's, a truther who's got a lot of experience. David, where are you at on this? And give us some background about yourself, your experience, and your concerns. And then after David, we're going to be able to open this up to Q&A. And I'm going to let Mike Z be the manager of our Q&A. Coming right up, Mike. David, go for it.
Thank you, Chuck. Okay, let me, since I'm doing video here as well, I've got multiple things to do. I previously was a progressive, and now I consider myself politically homeless. By the way, there's a wonderful website by Bridget Fedesi that's called Politically Homeless, and people write wonderful articles about how they've been basically sent away from the two-party system. So I feel that the progressives that had been my allies have gone off and become authoritarians during COVID, and people that support censorship and all kinds of values that I vehemently disagree with. I've been involved with election integrity issues for years now. I served on Bernie's election integrity team. I can't remember if it was 16 or 20, but one of them, and there was all kinds of nonsense going on that made it appear that the Democratic Party had gone in and changed the voter rolls and switched people out of the Democratic Party, gave them Republican registrations or third-party registrations. These are things that the people, so I served as a call center operator taking complaints, and it was really preposterous. And it was very clear to me that the registrars were not doing Bernie any favors in terms of making ballots accessible. So that was quite a moment. In the past, I have done things like read this book, Code Red, which is a computer scientist's analysis of how election machines can be rigged. I've done at one point a lot of reading on black box voting, which is a great website. And there I learned that when you do particular kinds of accounting, you can see where precincts that have larger sizes have their vote total, it's changed more. Something that we need to mention right now is that the whole world of exit polling has been essentially destroyed. Exit polling is considered the gold standard in other countries when you evaluate the validity of election counting. But in this country, they claim, oh, we must have gotten it wrong, so therefore we're going to adjust our exit polling consistent with vote totals, and thereby make everything look right. So this is a horrible development, and it's really important to get the unadjusted election exit poll totals if you want to do any kind of analysis. So when black box voting looked at these elections, I'm forgetting which state right now, but they found that when you compare the difference between the exit poll and the final election count, that there was a distinct difference between small precincts and big precincts. And I concluded that what that meant is that whoever was playing with the counting knew that they could cheat more in big precincts. And I even learned through black box voting how it's done, that on the tabulator software that is used in most counties, it's called GEM, that there is a field in which the arithmetic is handled not as an integer, which is what you would expect, but instead as a floating point. And what this means is this allows whoever wants to monkey with the data to go in and multiply the results by a percentage and then come out with a final total that's a lot less suspicious than if you had multiplied an integer total by a percentage. I don't know that I've explained that well, but if anybody wants to ask a question later, feel free to do so. I am bitterly opposed to the idea of commercial election software. It's a ridiculous idea that only in America could that happen. It's preposterous in its very conception, and this came out of HAVA, the Help America Vote Again Act, which came after the hanging Chad. And instead of improving vote counting, it made life much worse by having machines with no written ballot count, no way to audit the process. So that was a complete disaster. And I've been to conferences in which they talk about doing open source software for registrations, for tabulation, for various election functions. That's been in development in San Francisco. I don't know what it's turned into now. I've been to talks on risk limiting audits. These are ways to double check taking the ballots, a random sampling of ballots, and comparing them to the output of the scanners. This is something that has been developed. I actually implemented a small scale random audit when we thought that a vote change in a local county at the very end of the counting period was suspicious. And we went in, we got cooperation from the registrar of voters, and we were able to do a random sample and verify that that the counts actually were good, and that there's a process whereby they remake ballots that come in from faxes or ballots that get smudged or harmed in some way. We checked all of those visually, and they were legit. But that doesn't mean that elections are legit. And I came tonight eager to hear about what actually happened with the Trump election. I haven't heard any compelling recitations of evidence. I listened to one of the attorneys for Trump, who didn't make any sense to me, a woman named Sydney something or other, Powell. I'm open to hearing about it, but so far I haven't heard anything that adds up to a problem. I'd like to close with a story about 2004 in Ohio. I've read a lot about it. I've listened to a series of lectures by the people that were there. And what happened is the Secretary of State, whose name was Blackwell, had hired the IT contractor for the Republican Party to back up his server. And so the Secretary of State server was connected directly to a server in Chattanooga, which happened to host Republican Party functions. And at something like 11 o'clock the election night, Kerry had been ahead in Ohio, and the screens went blank, and the Secretary of State announced that they had some kind of failure. The screens came back up several minutes later, and the vote had flipped to where Bush was now ahead, Kerry was losing, and that essentially cost Kerry the election, and he didn't contest it. They act in a cult-like fashion to not contest their elections. Kerry, Gore, and any number of Democrats stand by and let their elections be stolen from them. So I think that's all I want to say about that, with one more thing, that a group of us here in California did an election protection effort during the 2012 election. We were each assigned a county, and because we don't trust any of these counties in their voting, we captured screenshots of the vote count as it went on during the evening and uploaded them to a giant Google spreadsheet. And the idea was that we would provide evidence to the on-the-ground lawyers in Ohio to take and challenge vote counts. As it turned out, that election didn't turn into a contest. So maybe that's the election where Rove was on TV, probably on Fox, and was vehemently saying, no, it's not possible that Bush lost. This is an interesting story. That was probably, well, I can't say which year that was. It was probably 2004. But the interesting part about it is I heard later from somebody that works in election protection that she had collaborated with Anonymous, and that they had set up a firewall surrounding Rove's server. And once the once the ballots started counting, they put up the firewall and prevented his server from generating data that would then corrupt the various vote counts. So it's a hilarious story. I can't confirm it, but it sounds right. So that's it for me, and let's go to Mike.
All right, thank you, David. I would like to begin the Q&A period, but before we do, I'd like to get Chris Jursky to give us his view on the reason for the suspicion in the 2020 election. What the question was asked, what evidence is there? But I also like to refer to it as suspicion, anomalies, strange occurrences. What type of activities, events do you point to that would suggest there was a problem with election integrity in 2020? Chris?
Well, to start out, first, you have to understand how much work was done. We didn't come to this conclusion lightly. I had to literally just give up my job, or my business really, because I was working with investors building software. And I essentially dedicated all my company's resources to this because, again, I clearly can see this by sending money to my family in Venezuela, what's coming for us. If you could suffer for the next 2 years and win this fight, or we're all going to be starving. That's what's coming for us. So what I did was I built a piece of software that analyzes all 15 million voter records in the state of Florida on a monthly basis. And I used tried and true practices that I've caught people defrauding payroll systems in the past by doing snapshots and comparing to see what's changed. And essentially out of that process, it took a great while to do, but we've reversed engineered essentially all of the statistics that show us what the supervisor of elections or what changes in the systems on a normal basis month to month. And one of the things that came out pretty clear when we first did the analysis, just to give you some ideas of some of the things we initially found, we found high concentrations of mail-in ballots at government buildings. So like courthouses, there's a courthouse up in the north end of Florida that happens to be in a time zone too, conveniently, that had somewhere around 10,000 mail-in ballots. And then when we confronted them, they said that this was basically military folks. But when you look deeper into the actual registrations, they were using the courthouse as a residential building, and then their mailing address was a campground down the street that acted as a forwarding address. I say this because all of these things that we found, all these weird anomalies that we found, all pointed to mail. Mail-in ballots was primarily the vector that we saw that was the biggest problem. And as we chased all these various schemes that we saw in mail-in versus the concentrations of people voting from fishing camps to nursing homes to government buildings, we discovered that there was a scheme where they broke the addresses, and these addresses then would force the ballot to become undeliverable. You've probably seen that little yellow sticker on mail before, or maybe you got mail to your house that somebody that you purchased the house from lived in there before. That's essentially all undeliverable mail, people that have moved away, that they're no longer reachable, and that will bounce back to the supervisor election. But what that little yellow sticker does is it accumulates all these ballots back at the post office. And even worse, in some cases, the printer knows if these are going to be undeliverable, because just with the same practices I used to identify these mailing ballots, because this is a tried and true method that Fortune 500 companies use. Amazon uses it to deliver, to check addresses, things like that. You can easily identify these things as undeliverable. So you know that these ballots will bounce. So they're hijacked. And what we found through whistleblower testimony and some things that we've compared to various states, a tray of ballots starts becoming marketable. And in some cases, a whole tray of ballots, depending on the race, could go for somewhere $4,000. So just think about this being a minimum wage employee working at a post office, and you're looking at a baker's rack full of ballots. That literally is a new car for you if you stole that whole baker's rack full of ballots. So it's very tempting for these ballots to get basically stolen and used in the NGO or the all these nonprofits or political groups that are out there. You've probably seen the movie 2000 Mules. That's essentially what we saw with the ballot stuffing basically back into the ballot box. But what we discovered that was more troubling is a systematic fraud that got into the millions. So when you see the 2000 Mules, some of the higher concentrations of ballots that were used for 2000 Mules, I think they use the example of Philadelphia with something like 250,000 ballots. We found situations where ballots were spread across the state like carpet. And most of the time when we tracked those down through canvassing efforts, these were people that moved away, and they were all spread out. Like there may be one ballot here, one ballot there, because essentially they're targeting your house, seeing that the person moved out of your house, that you've recently purchased their house, and now they're out of state, but they continue to keep on voting. Those schemes went into the millions because we started to find both addresses that were broken, that literally they broke the address just during the time frame to get the ballots. There's a famous story that went out basically called Red Belly Road, where it's essentially identity theft, where they flip the address. Somebody is breaking the address, requesting ballots now to that broken address, harvesting them without the person knowing, And then 2-3 weeks before the election, the address flips back to the correct address. But the one connecting dot through this whole scheme is they always break the address. The address basically is an undeliverable address. So that's really the key to the 2020 election. When we started looking back over the 2020 election, there was millions of ballots across the whole United States, because we checked this with multiple states, that they're clearly undeliverable. And somehow they all voted. So a perfect example of a very distinct address would be an apartment building that's missing an apartment. And somehow this person was able to get their ballot and vote. And then other situations that are more, a little bit harder to detect is you'll be looking at an address, we'll say apartment 8. And in reality, it's a broken address, because if you check the deed or you look at the mailbox, it's actually 8A. So they literally take one letter off of the address, break it temporarily, and then put it back to the correct address when you vote. So the really sneaky thing about this is that when you audit this steal, there's physical paper there. The ballot showed up. When you look at all of the records, the requests and all of that, everything looks legit. And when you're looking at the final result of the election, where they even show you the voter rolls of the people who voted, their addresses look correct, because that's all been switched back. So it's a very, very sophisticated steal, where they're literally changing these things months in advance of the elections, stealing ballots probably that would fill a 26-foot box truck, because we're talking about millions of ballots across the states. And just to give you an example of how this came out in the news, there's a whistleblower that came forward up in Pennsylvania, I believe. He testified that he drove a truck full of ballots from New York down to Pennsylvania, that he was wondering. I think that the whole thing is he never got paid for it. But the thing here is that this is a systematic steal at a very large scale. And it's basically coming in the background, and it's a little bit more sophisticated than just the hacks or changes of digital code. They actually have the physical paper that if you went and audited it, it looks like it was a legitimate election. So everything on the surface looks like it's audit proof, but you have to be watching the election over time to catch this kind of stuff. That's essentially the sad truth is we didn't know in 2020 that they were doing this to us. So we weren't watching in real time 2 or 3 months in advance what was happening. We looked back over the voter rolls and we can see all these distinct changes, but because we weren't watching, we didn't have like the what's called the vote by mail ballot requests and everything like that to definitively find that they were manipulating addresses during the 2020 election. But in the end, like I say, that who here believes that potato got 81 million votes? If you just do the math, essentially you already can tell that it breaks the total number of, I think it's over like 56 million more people voted in the 2020 election than there are voters when you put the entire mass of voters together. So we know that he cheated. It's just a matter of how. That's all. And since we've been watching it, the last thing I was add is that we've done a lot to clean up in Florida. So we know that this is a part of the steal, because they're systematically going back and changing their game. So hopefully that answers your question.
Hey, can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
Okay, all right. I want to make an observation that at 5:05, John O'Malley, he's one of our top people. He's on the board, and he produced a very lengthy chat. And I was going to read it, but it's where I want us to go in our conversation. And I want us to not necessarily litigate these elections, but reflect on what's going to give the American people confidence. Because as long as there's doubt, then we're going to have drama. And frankly, the hacking democracy, as far as I can tell, there's been no change to our rules. And it is kind of an odd thing, if you think about it, that in effect for the presidential election, there is no real, well, I was going to say federal oversight, because the elections are held by the states according to our Constitution. So So all I want to make an observation that Oregon is paper ballot. It was the first state to do this, and paper ballot, or the mail-in paper ballot, has been impugned. It's been represented as a very prone for theft and so on. And here's my point. It's a felony in the state of Oregon to steal a ballot and put someone's name on it for when you're not that person. So all of we need to remember that our federal prosecutor, our state prosecutors, their job is to prosecute criminals who steal ballots. So there's that piece of all of this. Is our system being policed? And then is there consequence for being dishonest? I'm going to just close with that and pitch it back to Mike. I mean, I do trust that people are going to be prosecuted, but at the same time, I'm not a spring chicken. And I know that there's a lot of corruption in our society, a lot of crimes that go unprosecuted. So that's what I wanted to share. I do want to say that go back to the chat at 5:05 and read what John O'Malley said. I think I basically agree with it. And there are a whole bunch of reforms out there. Anything from make election day a national, day off for everyone, make it more kind of civic. There's a number of things we could be thinking about, and maybe we think about our campfire meeting coming up on Friday, and we actually start thinking about making the campfire on Friday a time where here at TAP we can actually advance, solutions and securities, so that we do have confidence. Okay, Chuck out. Pitching it back to you, Mike,
All right.
to manage the Q&A.
All right, thank you. Before we begin the Q&A, I have the first question I'd like to ask all three of our special guests. They're a diverse group. And just real quick, do you feel the 2020 election was honest, or do you suspect it? Let us know with just a word or two. Go ahead, Chris.
No.
All right, Bill.
No, and I actually wonder if 2016 was thrown to Trump to set him up to be the fall guy for the COVID adventure, if we want to call it that.
And David.
I don't have enough information to make an informed decision, but I understand COVID to have been the deep state's response to Trump, so that this was intended to take him out. So I just haven't heard, any compelling evidence. What Chris said tonight was certainly intriguing. I haven't seen anybody talking about that, writing about that. It's certainly worthy of bringing this out on the election integrity sites. Maybe offering them a piece.
Right. I would like to note, though, this one self-evident point, that when the two men were running in 2020, it was often shown that Mr. Biden had very few people attend his meetings and had very low numbers in his crowds. On the other hand, with Trump, it was quite a stark difference. Everywhere he went, he had huge crowds, broke records, both in the Republican Party and other records that were known to have been prior. Me personally, and I think it's an observation that is honest. When you look at these two men and the numbers that they garnered in their meetings, it was a no-brainer. I mean, Trump, by a landslide, outperformed Mr. Biden in the public arena. So anyways, thank you all three for your comments. And I would like to now let everyone know, if you have a question on your device, you can select to raise your hand. And we will go to you as soon as you do that. And I think I might need some help with Trina. Are you able to help out in this, Trina, if anyone has?
I'll be doing that.
Okay.
And I can help. I'm here for backup. And also the documents that were referenced by John O'Malley, if anyone has Word, and by Chuck Fall, if anyone does have Word or PowerPoint, those have also been inserted into the chat if anyone would like to download those.
All right. Thank you, Trina. So if anyone has any comments, questions, remarks whatsoever, please, at this time, raise your hand. Go ahead. I think we have the one, David, is Bill Zwicker. He has his hand up.
Yes, yeah, I do.
Well, wait, he's part of our team.
Well, I just
Well,
want to make a comment. I want to follow up on something that you said, David, about the exit polling. And, I have a long enough history in voting. I remember when voting was in the hands of mechanical machines and polling places, and everybody had to go to the polls to vote, that the exit polls were pretty accurate. They were almost, like you said, they were the gold standard. And then all of a sudden enter the voting machines. And then they said, well, exit polls are not really scientific and you can't rely on them. And they just dismissed exit polling in spite of its accurate history out of hand.
That was a psyop.
Okay.
That was convincing you everything is just fine.
I agree. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, John Olson has asked to come on next after Bill finishes.
I'm done.
John, I saw
right,
you
John.
stack. Come off mute, Mr. Olson.
Yeah. Okay, there, I've unmuted. Okay, speaking of the black box voting, I remember on the 2004 election in Ohio that, and I remember Blackwell, and they had actually, I think, with Dominion owner, had promised Ohio to Bush. Of course, he was the one who was producing the machines, the voting machines. Dominion. But there was a guy, I believe, in Kentucky who was receiving the tallies from the Ohio vote and flipping them to make sure that Bush won, and then relaying them back, showing. And there was those reference to the switch there when things went a glitch supposedly, and things flipped from Kerry back to Bush. But that guy who was in Kentucky was then called to testify in Congress, and the day before he was to testify, he was traveling by plane to Washington, and wouldn't you know, the plane went down and he died. I don't remember the guy's name, but I remember that incident.
Well, he was the Bush
thing.
IT guy, and he was flying his own plane to
Okay.
a deposition in Ohio. It wasn't DC. And it blew up, and there were FBI people on the scene who scraped up all the evidence and disappeared. And so that was highly suspicious.
Sounds a lot like John Kennedy Jr., doesn't it?
Good point.
Anyway, so I'll not Robert Kennedy, but John Kennedy Jr. The other thing I want to do was to challenge Chris Jorsky on Venezuela. I appreciate greatly all the information and the technical knowledge that he revealed tonight about the voting here. But any discussion of Venezuela is incomplete without looking at the enormous, ruthless sanctions that the empire has imposed on Venezuela that strangled their economy and made it so that it's very difficult to survive, which then results in people coming to the border and that's part of the border crisis, has been for a number of years. From going back from Chavez time, that they've made about 1 million new houses for
Thanks,
people.
John, but
using-
that's not on topic. I happen to
Okay,
agree
all
with
right,
you,
but-
but it's
well, he was
simply not
talking-
on topic.
All right, okay. But since he had brought it up, I was commenting on what he was talking about.
Understood, but it's still not on topic.
Okay. That's it, then. Go ahead, next.
All right, is there anyone else that has a comment or question? Don't see any hands raised.
Well, let me just jump in if I may, and just observe that John is definitely one of my friends and comes from the left and is, concerned about that we not impugn and that we be objective and so on. So I think it is not on topic. It is a stretch. I think I just want to say this, that about that this is a very important topic. And if people in the Green Party, witnessed me and Bill hanging here talking, I think we're trying to be clinical, objective, pragmatic. They would still be, getting indigestion, because we have had people in TAP just recently, a member of TAP, say, well, the elections are fine. There's nothing wrong going on here. And having this doubt, well, people who are political truthers, it's your job to be a doubter. And you have to live with that, and you have to then navigate that. So when we have our family celebrate an election as all on the up and up, Donald really lost, Biden really won. I honestly, as Bill Zwicker observed, functionally, we have to take this on faith, because we don't have the mechanisms to give us confidence that's what's said and represented is true. And that's what I want to just kind of put out there. And so this conversation is important to the extent that it can direct us toward advancing policy statement, position, white paper on electoral integrity. I mean, we all want to, we want to be confident. And so a paper ballot is going to be critical. The capacity to test the machine, if we're going to have, so let me just say this, okay? I'll shut up. And this was Rachel Maddow, and I don't watch MSNBC except when I'm traveling and stuck on cable and I'm bored in a motel room or something. And I put Rachel Maddow on. If you want to know what the establishment's thinking, watch Rachel Maddow. And people who are skeptical of our electoral system and are calling for counting humans to count ballots are going back to the horse and buggy days. They are effectively Luddite, is the criticism. Okay, well, I don't mind being called a Luddite. I don't really have a problem with that. But to the extent that that becomes a specious ad hominem, then it's problematic, because Rachel isn't sincerely questioning, are we getting the truth around our electoral program? And that's what TAP's all about. That's what we're all about here tonight. So, I think I saw the hacking democracy. First of all, 2001, the Supremes came in and just dealt with that, because it's clear to me that the authorities that are the power elite wanted George Bush Jr. and Dick Cheney to be in the presidency for the events of 9/11. I'm as a 9/11 truther, I accept that and they engineered that. Would Gore have conducted any differently necessarily? I don't know. I honestly can't say that he would. But we are in a crisis in our nation, and I think this is very important. And again, we have.
I'd like to challenge you.
Oh, darn it, David! You always do that. But go ahead.
Some wise person, I can't remember who, said if voting could actually change anything, they wouldn't let you do it. So there's a long history of voting being performative behavior. And the reality is they, quote unquote, won't give us a choice of anybody we want. And you've seen that in terms of what they did to Bernie, and for that matter to Trump. And so I am by no means as hopeful as you about reform.
Well, David, I appreciate your deep skepticism, and I think it has merit. I think our movement is going to be working on multiple levels, and one level certainly is going to be critiquing the electoral process and bringing, bearing witness to the event. Now, you've gone deep to suggest that we are all in effect dancing puppets being plucked by the puppet master, and I can't even dismiss that because I'm that skeptical as well. But we are advancing reforms to our republic so that we are not dominated by a plutocratic oligarchy. And so we have to take this conversation seriously while at the same time being sober around what are we going to get out of our vigilance and so on. So I hear you, David, and I see there's some hands up. So Mike Z, take it to let's get some Q&A going here.
All right. I don't see any hands up, Chuck. Who did you see with a hand up?
Maybe I saw John Olson's hand from way back when, and maybe he has a reflective that he wants to share out again. No, he's done. He's done. No.
I would like to just respond to David. I'd like to challenge David. What if it's so hopeless? What are we to do? Are we to just sit idly by and not fight, not try to resist? I don't see that as an option. What say you, David?
You're asking an extremely important question, and my understanding is that we are living in a time of the collapse of the empire, and all kinds of truly catastrophic things happen at such times. And this is why a large number of people became interested in being survivalists. I'm not, but I recognize that things are going to get really rough here. And so the idea that we're going to come in and fix things, I just think is off. Now, Chris has an opinion. Let's hear from him.
But I would like you to elaborate just a bit there for a second. Then we'll go to Chris. But what are we to do? Just sit here and wait for it to happen? You don't see resistance as a means of a start, as a beginning to fixing it?
Well, I'm here. The very fact of my being here says that I see this as worthwhile. Mm-hmm. But my expectations are very low.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, David. Chris, let's go to Chris, and then we'll go to Bill Zwicker after Chris.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember the watching Donahue and the heated debates that we had back then. And I always say I pine for the days that we can go back to just arguing tax policies and fixing roads and figuring out how we're going to build things locally. But the thing that I'm really impressed with, that everybody can come together here virtually from all over. I'm assuming we're even not just in Florida, we're spread out across the United States, right? Or is
That's
this all,
California
right.
here,
are we all
Yes,
in
and we
Florida?
also have, yes, we also
California.
have New
Oh,
Zealand.
great. So that's what I mean. That's the beauty of good technology being used for good. Okay. And I see everybody here as an American. And I have to stress that because I kept on saying this all the time when I watched what was happening in Venezuela. That would never happen in the United States. I kept on saying that the veterans would stand up, the religious right would stand up, the conservatives would stand up. That would never happen here. And here we are. But the reality is the way to fix this is basically from the grassroots up. And I was studying advertising. There was this Milgram's experiment, it's called, where they essentially proved in the 1960s that we're all like basically not Nazi concentration camp employees. And what they did was they put people in another room and they had you sit, you didn't know this, you thought that you were basically in a group, but they would take somebody, put them in another room, and they were an actor, and you were put in front of a switch panel and told to administer a electric shock to the person in the other room. And you would listen to this person scream. And then what they proved is 50 to 60% of the people continued to just keep on administering the shock while this person screamed to the point where they went silent. And then ultimately, like in some cases, they were administering death blows to these people because they just kept on shocking them because the person in the white lab coat said, please continue, please continue. The key that no one ever keyed in on is they ran that experiment multiple times. And one of the disasters, one of the reasons the experiment didn't work in its early phases is because the person actually was looking at the person and had to administer the shock while they're looking at him. As soon as that was the point, the whole experiment failed. You were unable to administer the shock if you were looking that person in the eyes. And I bring that back to our humanity. I keep on telling people, I'm a technology person. I don't want anything to do with technology during our voting process anymore. Based on what I've seen so far, I don't want anything in technology. I want filing cabinets and paper ledgers. I want neighbors sitting down, looking at each other across the table, and we can have a heated debate. We can have a contest, but we're all Americans and we all believe in the rule of law and a peaceful transition of power. We'll respect that. We can all work together. We're all good people, but I believe that that has to come back to a we the people moment where we take this power back. The supervisor of elections and our elections officials become referees, not administrators telling us what happened. That's what happened here. We essentially outsourced our civic responsibility, and we kept on increasingly giving them more and more power to run our elections, and we became spectators to our own civic duties, and we essentially outsourced them. So that what I'm seeing this right now is this is a point where we have to take this back in. And what I keep on reminding myself, because I got two young children, one of them is within earshot of becoming within draft, and we're staring at World War III. That's the reason I fight what I'm fighting now. I don't want a war. Okay. I do not want a war. I do not want to see my child drafted and taken away from me. I don't want my children to starve. That's as clear as I can be. So what I'm saying is it going to be tough? Will my feelings get hurt? Will people call me stupid? I've heard that all for the last 2 years. Supervisor elections yelling at me on the phones and everything else. I don't care anymore because people basically faced bullets on beaches in Normandy. I will take some slings. I will take some insults. I will take some threats. But as far as I'm concerned, I'll fight this battle because we need to return this back to we the people. We need to look at each other across the table, count our votes, come to an agreement because we witnessed what we counted at the precinct level, and all of our neighbors know what happened without having somebody on TV tell us what happened. And then we give that result up to the state. And that's what's going to fix this problem. And it's also going to bring down the temperature where right now we have people like, I don't even know what happened. I had good friends that I used to debate with all the way through college. And when this all happened, they were lit. Like I used to say to myself, like, I wonder how those people got marched into ovens and into the gas chambers. And now I know, because I mean, I witnessed it myself. People refused to bring me. I can't go into the vaccination thing, but I mean, I was told flat out that I wasn't able to come to people's Christmas dinner because I wasn't vaccinated. So like this is what we're dealing with. We went through the blessing is that we went through this with our own experience. And now we know beyond a shadow of a doubt how easily people are manipulated into essentially turning into Nazi concentration workers. So we have to reverse that, going back to our humanity. And that starts with counting our ballots at the local level.
All right. Thank you, Chris. And now let's go to Bill Zwicker.
Yeah, those are excellent points you just made. And, the observation I had, especially made aware more by the COVID experience, is how much conservatives and progressives who otherwise see themselves on opposite teams have much more in common. And it's really a few points that, while they're important for each side, it's not enough to keep people apart. And somebody mentioned, I think David mentioned, preppers and how people are trying to prepare for what the bad times that are coming. And I always found that a bit short-sighted, the idea that, if you get enough of this or that stored away, and even to the extent of having ammunition, you're going to be able to fend off the hordes. That's nonsense. You're not going to be able to stand off as an isolated family and protect you and yours from any kind of mob that comes at you. So I think the key here is, I think we're going to see a relocalization process going on. And in what you were just saying, Chris, about people sitting across the table and looking at each other in the eye and making commitments to each other. That's really the grassroots of our democracy. Our democracy works on the local level when everybody knows each other. Everybody knows who the guy is who's an opportunist that wants to take advantage of people, and people who stand behind their word and their values. And I think that's one of the strengths of conservatives. They tend to be more like that. Business owners that do, I did a couple of jobs locally here, and they were very respectful, and they didn't take the COVID thing seriously at all. Once I indicated to them I didn't care whether they were wearing a mask or not, they all relaxed, and we got along fine. So I think being more involved in local politics, and maybe school boards and things like that, that's the start. Once you can start building that, being able to participate in a local political process and accept the results, that's the important thing. If you lose, can you accept the other person being in charge? I think it's very important for a person who loses legitimately, and somebody raised questions about some of the Democrats, whether they did that or not, Al Gore and John Kerry. But if you lose and you recognize that really is the choice of the people, you support the winner. I think that's key. That's not happening now. Nobody wants to support the winner that is on the losing side. And that's toxic.
All right. Well said, Bill. Thank you very much. And I think we are about to close in on our presentation tonight. And I think since no one else has any questions or comments, I think I'll just hand it back over to Chuck. And I would like to just say thank you for all your participation tonight. And I think we really did a good service showing that we have a diversity of opinion. And I think even though David couldn't say he was suspicious. I think the three guests universally have concern, to say the least. Could you agree with that?
I will agree with you. Biden had the most ludicrous campaign I've ever heard of. And so the idea that he won is bizarre. But
Yes.
I don't have any specifics to hang a doubts on, unlike other things.
But you
like
do have
9/11.
concerns about the 2020 election. Is that true? Can you agree with that?
I would just say I've been looking for evidence and I haven't found any. So I'll just leave it at that
Okay.
and say good night.
Well, let me get I'll make the final remark here, Trina, and then you can end the recording. And then we can stick around and people can peel off and we can have some chit chat off recording. And I just want to observe that in the chat, Dave Schoenbrunn is taken to task for being a defeatist. And I want to
Oh, that's hilarious.
I know. That's really I love our chats. I'm happy that David is here tonight and that he shared and that he provides his critical perspective. And I think that's really fundamentally what we're all grappling with. And I feel somewhat uplifted from our conversation and the sense that there is solidarity for integrity in our election. All of the naysayers that would say, well, you're stupid to even doubt. And that's really what this comes down to, is if you're a doubter and you're a skeptic and you believe in political truth, the ad hominem is to say, well, you're stupid, because it's so evident to me, the perceiver, that things are on the up and up and there's nothing wrong here, that they can smugly say that. But I think our task is to, blow it off, not get dragged into a necessarily even a debate. And I think that and again, I'm going to refer people to our Friday campfire, very informal, talk around. But I think we should continue to explore this and with the understanding that this is a galvanizing issue and people want to be confident. And it's the role of, I think, political truthers to tell a story that will imbue confidence. And I'll close with this. And even though Mark Twain said, if elections were whatever that someone posted in the chat, the Mark Twain passage, which is that if an election was going to make a real difference, they wouldn't let us have them. So that really we're subject to a kind of puppetry is what's implied. I honestly, as a kind of agnostic on all of this, because we don't have hard evidence, because they do cover these things up, they do conceal malfeasance. That's not to say be defeatist or give up, is to say to remain on point and to remain vigilant and to push the issue. So that's what we're doing here at TAP. And again, if you can like us, share us on social media, you will help TAP grow and expand our ranks. We do believe that there is a political currency in the political truth movement, and that we can make a difference by insisting on a political truth. So I'm going to end with that. I'm Chuck Fall. I co-hosted with Mike Zarzano. Mike, thank you for leading on this. Any other closing remarks? Trina, do you want to add anything? Any final thoughts from our guests? Chris, if you had a closing, you're welcome. And we're going to end our recording in a moment. Any thoughts? Anything you would want to say, Trina, Chris?
All I was just going to add is just thank you for having me. And all these kind of things always give me a uplifting, because again, it's It's various political affiliations from across the country coming together to save their country. And that's essentially what defines us as Americans.
This is critical. We want to build alliances across the spectrum.
Absolutely.
And that's what TAP's all about. And John, a reflection from you, please.
Yes, I just put in the chat one of my favorite slogans. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we are seeds.
Oh, lovely. Okay,
Great.
that's
Not
great.
from me, but I mean, somebody else came up with that, and I just love that one.
Thank you, John.
And I think that's the case.
Yep, that's what we are.
Leaving on a positive message.
That's great.
Hey,
Thank
Trina,
you.
go ahead and end the recording, and people can hang out afterwards and we can chat.
Okay, give me just a moment.
Peace.
One more second.
Pizza.
Pizza. World peace.